bookshop. It's the bookshop. It's the bookshop of Beverly Farms.
Howdy, everybody. It's Sam Fightful, and once again, you have stumbled, probably inadvertently, into your favorite podcast about reading, literature, bookstores, and all things fun and awesome. John Updike's Ghost, and once again, live from the bookshop, I am joined by the one and only Hannah Harlow. How are you doing today, Hannah?
I'm doing great. It's a Monday afternoon on a rainy day in the bookshop, having a lovely time.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
How's business today? Now, we're doing this in the afternoon for the first time ever, folks, at the demand of the CEO of Industry Books, LLC. Hannah Harlow has determined that we can no longer do this every other Monday at 9 a.m. It must now be in the afternoon. So my whole vibe could very well be different from time now until forever.
I know. I think we're both very nervous about this, but we had a change of schedule amongst all the booksellers. We just shifted things around. And so now I am working at 9 a.m. on Mondays.
Yeah, well, that's why you get paid the big bucks to be the CEO, to make the tough decisions. We will see if it
We'll see how this
our
goes.
ratings here at the podcast.
It'd be great if people wanted to give us a little rating.
That's right. Yeah. You want to rate us on the Spotify's or Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Give us a little review even. You could just talk about the mellifluous tones that I possess and Hannah possesses, and how it makes you feel good about yourself and everything is right with the world.
You love books so much.
People might remember from last time my Reddit frustration. I have actually, this is total sidebar, it has nothing to do with books, but managed to elicit 67,000 views for one of my Reddit threads.
Wow.
Week, with 250 some odd comments.
Is this a book thread or was it like a baseball thread?
It was a musician's thread, so as I said, a little bit of a sidebar. Also, they mostly tooled on me, which was not the best, but you know.
I might have to go check that out now.
You'll never find it. You'll never find it. It's so hard to find. Anyway, I have been doing a lot of reading. I'm going to start off this podcast by saying we had some serious tragedy here in Maine last week. But I am not going to let it steal my joy. I'm not going to be sad about it. I'm not going to let some douchebag with a gun determine how I'm going to live my life. And I'm going to keep reading books and keep having fun, and I'm not going to let them steal my joy. So I will not be sad during this podcast, but it was a very sad thing.
It was a sad thing. And I just briefly want to say that if any of our listeners are not receiving our bookstore newsletter, which goes out every other week, first I want to clarify that Sam writes those. I get lots of notes saying, good job, Hannah, for writing this great newsletter. And I always say, I'm going to give credit where credit's due. Sam writes it, and he had a really lovely, even lovelier than usual note about the tragedy that happened in Lewiston last week. So you should sign up on our website for the newsletter if you are not getting it already.
Yeah, and I do sign it from both of us because as a writer, I always imagine you in my brain, and I do make sure that any sentiment that we express, you would wholeheartedly endorse.
Well, I do, and I read them all before you send them.
You do have it.
And sometimes I say, let's tone it down here, or
for sure,
add this in here. Sometimes I have notes. Not really, though.
Let's see. Speaking of notes, I want to return to a book. Let's get into books we have read. I want to return to a book that we mentioned briefly a few podcasts ago, but is now actually coming out this week. And so I want to make sure that people know about it because I loved it. It's a book called The Future by Naomi Alderman, and she is the author of a book I also really enjoy called The Power. People might remember The Power was all about what would happen if women suddenly had superpowers and men didn't, how that would change things. And this new one is about, it's awesome. It's, I would say, a near future telling where basically we've got social media titans. We have proxies that are characters for Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk, essentially,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
And they're proxies for them. They own similar companies, and our hero is someone who is like a YouTuber on what would happen, like if the world ends, like a prepper, right?
Okay.
So she's one of these people who like teaches people how to prep. So, how the best tents for living in the winter after the zombies come or whatever. I don't know.
Cool.
And so she discovers that these billionaires have a big and extensive plan for what will happen should the apocalypse comes, right?
Right.
And so they are.
And do they know something we don't know?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And also there is a character who grew up in like a prepper, like commune type of thing, right?
Mhm.
And she is now a staffer or a high level person at one of these Facebook proxies or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And so we have prepper content, we have the actual narrative of the book, and then we have these like posts on this prepper forum from this woman who grew up. And so, I mean, it's one of the smartest books I've read in a long time. Naomi did a ton of like Bible research, especially. There's like all this like Sodom and Gomorrah, parallels, because like basically God wiped, Sodom off the face of the earth, right? And
Mhm.
Lot's wife looked back, bad plan. She got turned into salt, right? You have to look for, it's kind of like a, biblical.
Is that what the future is kind of referencing? Like, don't look back?
Like you can't look back, right?
The
like,
title,
once crap happens, you got to look to the future. The title is really about like, how do we prep for the future, right? And I'm not going to, there's like 17 different like, oh shit, moments that I will not give away, but it's just
enticing.
It's crazy smart. I can see it's very similar to like the Babel backlash, right? All the smarty pants are going to be like, oh, all the characters are too wooden. They're too obvious, like.
Because she has like a plot and she has a idea, right?
Yeah. And it's like satire, right?
Yeah.
So yes, these characters are purposefully like wooden and stand-ins for like types of people, right?
Yeah.
And I think the heavy-handedness is part of the point. Like, look how ridiculous this is, right? And I think
got it.
People don't give Babel credit for doing that. Like, yes, it is a really obvious proxy for colonialism, right? But like that's the point, like the fact that colonialism happens in plain sight and we don't do anything about it. And then everybody acts like, well, everybody knows about colonialism. Well, if you do, why don't you do anything about it? Why, why haven't we done anything, right? You just know about colonialism and aren't you smart, right? But like, I think the point is, hey, maybe we should actually do something different or change the way we're living or whatever, And so the indictment of this book of anybody who uses social media is massive, right? Like, I was just having this, I was having this discussion. I was in a school board meeting or school board conference this week, and we're sitting in this presentation on how social media like poisons our kids and, all this data like increases.
Like we know this.
Yeah, like this is a thing, right? And the guy at the front is like, oh, it makes like 30% of kids under the 18 using it want to commit suicide, blah, 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 blah. And like everybody around me, they're all like older people, right? And they're like, yeah, I know, but it's like, we're not going to stop using it. And I'm like, but why
not?
Like, what is so good
why
about
not?
It? It sucks ass. Like, it's the worst. It makes everybody feel bad about themselves. Scientifically proven it makes you depressed. But we're like, but it's not like we can put the genie back in the bottle. It's like, but you could actually stop using it,
You know what drives me
like
insane?
what this book is. Yeah.
I try not to use Facebook anymore, as you know, because I make you do our Facebooking. So my son is on a flag football team, and the only way to get updates and get the schedule is to go on Facebook.
Yes. Oh my God, drives me insane when they
That's
do that.
insane. And I'm like, now I have to open this app and I'm feeling anxious and I'm seeing all these updates and I don't want to see them.
Yes. Yes. But the only way you can participate in this sport or this club or this activity is to go to the bad place that makes you want to kill yourself. Like, okay, I guess. All right. That's the way we've set
And I'm
ourselves
actually
up.
thinking, like, I think we're not going to play next year. And that's like 50% of the reason.
And people are like, oh, what did we do beforehand? It's like, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I played youth soccer like from the time that I could stand up, and we didn't have any Facebook.
Right.
And we somehow managed it. We somehow managed to show up at the right place in the right time. I don't know I don't know how we did it.
Once all season received an email communication from his coach.
Yeah.
I don't how is that possible?
Well, email is archaic. Just go to Facebook and you'll see everything you need to see. It's the best.
Anyway, we've digressed.
Anyway, The Future, Naomi Alderman. Read it.
Segue with just like staying with genre.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I read Starling House by Alex Harrow.
Mm-hmm.
And Alex Harrow is one of these authors, you know, she's written
like
a bunch.
Fantasy?
It's, I would call this horror light.
Horror light.
But yeah, it's fantasy.
Yeah.
And she has a bunch of books at this point, and I just feel like she's been on the rise. You know, with each book, she kind of gets more and more attention, and I think maybe sells more and more books.
As like a book talk book.
And then this was a Reese Witherspoon pick, Starling House.
Whoa.
Yeah, so now it's been on the bestseller list for a month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I'd give it a try, and I did enjoy it. It took me a little while to get into it. The voice is like pretty, you know, grumpy and sad and dark. And you're just kind of like, you know, she's lived
first person.
It's first person present tense.
Right now.
Yeah. And it's a 25-year-old woman who you know, doesn't have any parents, and she's raising her 15-year-old brother. And they live in this like terrible town in Kentucky that, you know, the energy that, you know, it's been mined and there's coal and blah, blah, blah. And the energy company has money and they're awful and they're destroying the earth. And then everybody else is like dirt poor. Yeah. If you don't work for the energy company, you're dirt poor, and they don't. And there's also this house in town called Starling House. That's kind of this like Gothic, you know, gated house that no one ever goes in or out, but everyone kind of knows this guy Arthur lives there. But you never see him, and there's only ever like one light on in the window. And she's like a little obsessed with this house. And then one night, she like cuts her hand, and Arthur comes and to like help her with her hand is bleeding all over the place. And like whatever, they have a connection. And
in the house, outside of the house, where does she cut her hand?
Outside of the house, on the gate.
So she's just looking at the gate, cuts her hand on the gate. Arthur is looking out the window and says, "Oh, I noticed you cut your hand."
Something like that. Just go with it. Right. Yeah. It's more complicated than that. It all works. It's fine. Whatever. And then he offers her a job cleaning the house. You have some interstitials with Arthur's point of view.
Oh, okay.
And you see him thinking like, I have all this money and I'm not going to need it that much longer. I'm the last warden. He has no heir. Yeah, I'm the last warden of this house. I mean, he's not that old, but then for a while you think he is really old, and then you realize he's only like 30 or something. So you're on the
downside of life by then anyway.
So like it comes apparent pretty quickly that this house is sitting, I'm going to use Buffy terminology so you understand, it's sitting on basically a hellmouth. And the warden of the house has to, you know, kill all the slay all the demons that come out of the hellmouth.
Sure the bad guys don't come out and ravage the local countryside.
Right. But there's like a lot more plot mixed in there about like, there's a mystery around the main character's mother's death, and like, can she raise enough money to get she and her brother out of this town, and what's really going on with the Hellmouth, and why is it there, and you know, who created it and who built this house. And so there's like lots of other stuff.
I bet it was the energy company. I bet they're complicit.
They are. I'm gonna give away some of the ending. They are complicit.
Oh wow, I didn't see that coming.
In there that make it good.
I figured.
Yeah.
But so, I assumed the energy company was the big bad ultimately, right?
Of course. Right. But yeah, so it's just like a little grim for a while until, things really start to pick up. So it just took me a while to get into it. But once I was into it, I thought it was very enjoyable.
And so, but it's like contemporary.
It's contemporary. They have cell phones and stuff. And
Right.
her brother makes cool videos on YouTube. And the horror, like I called it horror light because there's some demons, but it's not. And there's good action, but it's not like terribly scary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's stay with genre.
Okay.
I have read, so this is part of my library project where I go to the library and I'm only allowed to choose books from the new release hardcover section of my local library.
Is this a new project?
I've read 2 books there now.
Okay.
That's where I got the Japanese detective fiction from last time.
Right.
Tokyo City there.
Okay, you hadn't mentioned the project. I like this.
I'm not. It's now a project. It was only like 3 books, and now it's a 4th book, and now it's a project.
Great.
Unfortunately, I have deviated from the project because the new Christopher Paolini was one of them.
Yes.
And I knew it was like set in the fractal verse or whatever.
Right.
And so it was the second fractal verse book. And I was like, okay, well, I do want to read this, but I can't read the second fractal verse novel before I go back to the first fractal verse. So I walked into the stacks and I got the first in the fractal verse saga,
so
which is
kind of cheating on your project, but I get
cheating,
it.
But I'll read that book next. It's called To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. And
yes, I recall when this came out.
It had to be a pretty big deal when it came out, I would think. It was 2020. Yeah.
Yep.
But I don't think we sold any of them.
We sold like 1 copy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a big deal for other people, not for us.
It's not really our general community vibe.
Right.
It is very large. It took me it's more than 850 pages.
Yeah. Remind everybody who Christopher Paolini is, because I think people
Paolini
might remember his earlier books.
Yeah, he wrote the Aragon series about dragon riders, which Aragon, I believe, he wrote when he was like 14 or something.
Really young.
Really young. The kid's clearly a genius, like the kid, super genius, whatever. Talks like a just total weirdo. His acknowledgments, and anytime you see it, he just like throws in like Arthurian references and, he talks like he lives in 1540 or something. I don't know. But also with laser. And so just weirdo. And so, as he says in the acknowledgments, he worked on this book, he was still writing the Inheritance Saga, which was the Aragon books. They turned into 4 books instead of 3 books, and couldn't figure that out. And then it took him 10 years to write this book, which is his like new big saga, Fractalverse. At which point he never even went to high school, but he taught himself particle physics basically. And so, invented like legit how you would do time travel and like the Markov drive that allows you to escape the stars. And there's lots of rules. And he actually has a whole section where he teaches you the physics of how the Markov drive works. And it's in the, appendices. And like, there's lots of equations and math and shit, and it probably makes sense. And then, there's, he invents an alien species, and like, it is one of the densest books I've ever read. It's very compelling. I read the whole thing very fast, but he does this thing that he did in Aragon. And I didn't really notice it before, but now I notice, like, so he's trying to give you like this gritty realism, right? Like putting you there, which he does in general. But like everything that anybody does has to be described in detail. So like every time 2 ships docked, it's like the ships were approaching and the doors slid open and a puff of air came out and the steel glistened and there was a clang of this and that. And it's like, dude, I know how it works because you've told me about this happening 10 times in this book already. Like the 2 ships merged. We went through the airlock. I don't need it's like 2 pages to go through the airlock. It's like, dude, right?
Well, that's why it's 850 pages.
Yes, it's like constant, like, one of the big criticisms of science fiction and fantasy, which I get, is like, when do they eat, sleep, and shit? And like, but he makes sure to tell us, like, every sleep is recorded. Oh, and everybody's constantly grabbing ration bars and having this snack and drinking this and taking this piss, and and it's just like, okay, I guess, like, you don't have to tell.
Racism.
I know
like,
that they eat. I don't care. How
right. In like regular fiction, non-genre fiction, we're not always getting like when they're eating and sleeping. And
John Updike is like, and then they woke up and had Raisin Bran. And it's like, no one cares what they had for breakfast. Like, who cares?
That's
I'm assuming they're not starving, but so there's like lots of fine details. And it's like, okay, I know what they look like. You've told me 100 times. And, so that's my
beyond that.
That's my one real criticism.
Yeah.
But
and you said you're still going to read book 2.
Oh, for sure. No, it's like really interesting. It's a good science. It's like good, pure science fiction. It all makes sense. And there's like a little bit of magical realism where you can't really tell, like, is this nanotechnology or is it magic, or, I don't know what it is.
So, what's interesting about your timing
What's
is that there's
He's
a
got
new
another
book.
one. He's got Murtaugh comes out like this week.
Murtaugh's coming out this week. And that's
another
book
Think
in
how
the
prolific is this
series.
guy. He wrote 4 dragon books, 2 of these Sleep in a Sea of Stars books. He's got Murtaugh coming out, and he's still like 35. Like, it's
if that.
No, he said he's in his late 30s or in his mid 30s in the acknowledgments, which was 2020. So, but yeah, 8. He's probably I don't know. It's actually funny in the acknowledgments. He talks about going back again, more detail than anybody has in any of their acknowledgments. But like, he talks about how his editor and his readers were like, "Dude, this book blows. Like, no, we're not going to put it out." And he said he had to like replot it like 4 times before they were like, "Okay, fine, this we can put out." But I thought that was,
that's awesome.
I feel like that's encouraging. Like, even this genius who wrote 5 super popular novels, like, his editor was like, "This book was like doesn't go."
Yeah. No, I love that. I think you write a bunch of books and so you get overconfident and you're like, I know how to do this. I'm awesome.
That's exactly what he says, actually. He's like, I just thought I could just burn through an 850-page book, but nope.
I love that. I have no segue. The next book I read is called Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. Oh, yeah. And this book doesn't come out until February 2024.
Highly anticipated, though.
I thought maybe people would be excited to hear about it early. Tommy Orange is the author of There, a novel that came out a few years ago, and I actually haven't read. Did you read that?
For some reason, I thought it was short stories. There's a novel?
I think it's a novel kind of made up of... They were calling it a novel in the material I read online.
Okay.
But it could be like kind of a stories make up a novel. I don't know.
I also have not read it.
Well, maybe one of us will have to...
I guess so.
Read it. Anyway, Wandering Stars, from what I gathered, you do kind of, I think there are relationships to characters in the previous novel. So someone who's read the previous novels might get more out of Wandering Stars than I did, but I still think it's a great novel on its own. Yeah, it's all the same universe. The first, it's kind of a novel in 2 big parts. So the first half of the novel is historical and it starts, at the Sand Creek Massacre in the 1860s. What I love about this book is it references these like pretty major events in Native American history that I myself was pretty ignorant of, but I'm
not sure I could have told you where the Sand Creek Massacre was.
Right. But this is like a huge, awful event. And he leaves it to the reader to like, go figure it out. You should know about this. Mm-hmm. And I love that. And there was another, later he starts referencing Alcatraz and how the native people went to Alcatraz and they were there for 2 years to make a point about stuff. Which
about stuff.
You should look that up. I'm really prepared. So it was.
What is the plot of this book?
Okay, so the plot of this book. So the first half is this guy escapes from the Sand Creek Massacre.
We're in the 1800s.
We're in the 1800s. He basically gets imprisoned and then, gets recultured to be more white. And is then living, whatever, has a family.
Like as a kid?
Bad things happen. No, he's now an adult.
Right. But was he an adult when he's recultured?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then his kid is sent to, one of the boarding schools.
Yeah.
He disappears for various reasons. So then you get the son's story.
Oh.
And then you get his daughter's story. So you get like a couple, it's a little bit, you get a bunch of generations stories. And then halfway through the novel, you jump to like 2018. And then you get a family, and they are related to these other people you read about. And they're almost like everyone's addicted to drugs and everyone's messed up. And so so it's not easy reading. It took me a little while to get through it for sure, but I thought it was definitely worthwhile. He writes in these really long sentences and like repeats words in different phrases within the same sentences. But like, the second time he uses the same word, he's using it like a slightly different way. So you keep having to like, oh, what does he mean?
Catch yourself a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really interesting. And it was, like I said, a worthwhile read, but it wasn't like an easy read. But it did remind me of another book that came out recently, which is Jessamine Ward's Let Us Descend.
Mm-hmm.
And I love her. I think she's like a spectacularly
Wait, is that
beautiful.
the new one or that's the old?
The new one?
Okay, yeah.
And that novel is the story of an enslaved woman and just like the horrors she goes through. And Jessamine Ward's books often have ghosts in them. There are definitely like hauntings in this book. It's insanely beautiful, but like so hard to read, just because like atrocious things are happening.
Right.
And so I just think like both of these books are kind of grappling with these like the horrors of our history, and they're really important to read. And I think even though it's hard, both of them do a really good job of like giving us language to grapple with and marvel at.
And so at the end, do you feel as though we are hopeful?
Yeah, actually. Yes. Definitely with Wandering Stars.
Definitely with Wandering Stars.
Yeah. They, you go through addiction and recovery with various characters, and it's not like a completely perfect situation or totally happy, but you feel like they've come to a, better place.
Yeah. I feel like for the consumer of books, we are, and this is a comment that you gave me on a book that I'm working on, is that it always has to, like, it can't just be bleak. There always has to be this kind of spark of hope in the finish.
Yes. I mean, even a book like Sterling House, I think that's a really good example, because that book is super bleak. And it is about like living in poverty and this, the terrible things that people have done to the earth and to communities in the name of money and power.
Then we kill all the demons and we're all good.
But that one, like that book, spoiler, has a happy ending.
Right. Yeah. I mean, all those kind of books always have a happy ending.
Right. Right. It's not a total spoiler, I don't think. In a book like Wandering Stars, I think that one could go either way. Like he could be making a point by saying like, no, everything's still really fucked up and horrible.
Right. Well, I think sometimes we need like to sit in our bleakness,
Yeah.
I don't know. So kind of I think that was one, my book is very contemporary as well. This next one that I read, it's kind of similar in a way. It's called Lazy City by Rachel Connolly.
I'm excited to hear about this.
I liked it. I thought it was really good. Rachel Connolly is an Irish author, and the book it reminds me a lot of like Bright Lights, Big City, or like, so it's set in Belfast, and it's about, 25-year-olds partying in Belfast, basically. And it reminds me a lot of, the Bret Easton Ellis and all that sort of stuff, like just the nihilism of, people doing tons of drugs and not really having any place to go and, no prospects or whatever. It's not as nihilistic as those books, I would say. I think probably because I'm sure Rachel has read those kind of books, and, it's very contemporary. I believe she probably is 30, if I were to guess, looking at her picture or whatever. So she's done this recently, and it's all set in the shadow of the Troubles, essentially, right? Everybody's,
Yes.
got family or whatever that was killed. And so that kind of hangs over. And it's also it's one of those small, big cities where, everybody knows each other. You go to the bar and somebody's brother or sister or cousin or uncle or whatever is always there. And so it follows this, seems like a Rachel proxy or whatever in the first person. She has had this, tragedy happen to her. She's at university and her roommate, her best friend, has died. And so she has quit university and moved home to Belfast, where she's working as a nanny, just to kill time, basically. And, it's pretty bleak. Everybody.
Oh, more bleak.
Well, they all their relationships are super transactional. They go out to the bar, they get fucked up, they do a bunch of coke, they sleep with somebody, they text them thanks so much, and they go back to their pointless existence or whatever. And this woman is haunted by her trauma. We don't find out for a long time what killed this woman, right? And so that's kind of this thing that's hanging over. And I will assure people, I was getting pissed. I was if they don't freaking say what happened to this woman,
that does get annoying when they hang on to that
right?
information.
But I was right. But and it felt like it kind of mattered too, how this woman died. I was that would affect my opinion here, but you do find out at some point. And also I think it makes some sort of sense, because I think we're supposed to see that she's grappling with what happened, and she just has all this trauma, and she recognizes she has this crappy relationship with her mother. Who knows where the father is? Multiple partners that have screwed her over or whatever. But I think it's especially for older readers, what's going on with the kids these days. I think this is what it's like. And Kristen, my wife, has a young office mate now that she works with, and she's kind of talking about the dating life or whatever. She's 27 or something, and we just talk about it all the time. It must suck to be 27 and dating now. It's awful, the apps and all these rules, and you can't just meet anybody now, and you're a psychopath if you walk up to somebody at a bar. If you haven't already exchanged 10 messages on a dating app, it's insane to think that you would go out on a date and then you do this date, and it's constantly is that date good enough to go on another date? Or then you just cycle through all these dates, and and so that's kind of in here. It's not the dating app stuff, but it's just oh yeah, we had sex, but we're not together, and it's just she's cheating on him and he's cheating on her, and who's at fault and who cares? I don't know, the whole, it's it just doesn't paint a great picture of being in your mid-20s in Belfast anyway, but it seems pretty universal. I can't imagine it's that different in Portland.
Yeah, that sounds not that fun.
Yeah. Really well written. Like I said, it reminded me of all that, a lot of authors that I like. Who wrote Bright Lights, Big City? Macca something?
Jay McInerney.
Jay McInerney. Reminded me of that a lot, But
cool. I love that book.
Yeah. One thing I really don't like, instead of using quotation marks, all spoken words are in italics.
Oh.
Which I hate. Because then when things should be in italics, when something should be in italics, then it's in a different font, or, it's no, italics are for internal dialogue, and external dialogue is quotation marks. When you have to do an internal dialogue, it doesn't work. And then it's just plain text. And is she thinking, or is this, so that's the one thing I would change. Let's just use quotation marks. They work really great.
Right. I have to back up for a second, because I totally just, lost everything that was in my brain when I was talking about Alcatraz. So I just want to go back. So I'm not like a total asshole here. And say that it was an occupation by about 100 indigenous people for about 2 years in 1969. And they wanted to use the island. They were in negotiation with the government, trying to use the island for a cultural center and university for Native people.
And yet it became a prison.
Yep.
That's quite the metaphor.
Right.
Gross.
Anyway,
You have another book?
I do have one more.
I have another book too, so go ahead.
And it's like maybe a little different for me. I might call it a guilty pleasure, but I don't actually feel that guilty about it. I listened to Britney Spears' memoir.
Oh, I'm definitely going to read that.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it's
it
not
was
a guilty
amazing.
pleasure. I've seen some excerpts that are hilarious. Like, does she read it?
No.
Oh.
So she reads a very brief intro where she's like, I don't really need to relive this again by reading the audiobook.
Right.
And it's read by Michelle Williams.
Oh,
and
really?
Phenomenal.
Wow. Oh, I bet.
There were times where I forgot it wasn't Britney.
Yeah, so she's like acting Britney.
Yes.
Basically. It's all first person, obviously. And
yes.
So I did this, I did that. Yeah.
It's so good. So that's another audiobook. That's my, if you bought Tom Lake on audiobook, because I told you Meryl Streep was amazing, now you should go buy
Michelle Williams.
Michelle Williams reading Britney Spears' memoir.
Oh my God. It's like, tell me about the quality of the prose. She used a ghostwriter, I'm assuming.
I'm assuming she's a ghostwriter. I actually meant to research if it's available online, who the ghostwriter was. I'm curious. I actually thought it's pretty good. Like, there are definitely times where it's just like pretty plain language.
Right.
Like
what I heard, the part that I read or quote I saw or whatever, very subject, verb, object.
Yeah.
But like, it almost made it better because there was like no embellishments of like some of the craziest shit that I was like, wait, what happened?
I mean, some really crazy shit happened.
Yeah.
It did. I will say
she's such a victim. Like it's absolute bullshit. Just
it's
absolute
insane.
bullshit what happened to her.
So you get toward the end of the book and you're like, oh, there's so much victimhood happening. And like, she's so like, and then I couldn't leave my house, and then no one would give me my kids back. Like Kevin Federline stole my kids and I couldn't get them back, and I was like banging on his door, and paparazzi were chasing me and then putting me on the cover of all the magazines saying I was an unfit mother.
Yes.
And and you're just like, this is horrific.
Evil shit.
But it does get to the point where you're like, oh, I need something good to happen. This is so bad.
Yeah.
The conservatorship is insane. Like her parents are evil people.
Yeah, I know. But nothing good happens, right? Like she's still in the shit as far as
she got out of the conservatorship.
Oh, okay.
She's like a free person.
Oh,
now.
she won that. I didn't know she.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
maybe that's why she can tell the story now.
That's why she can tell the story, and she talks shit about her parents. And
right. Yeah.
When she was in the conservatorship, there's one point where she says, she basically agreed to it because it allowed her to allowed her to be able to see her kids again. Like they were kind of like, okay, we'll let you see your kids and we'll make all this happen. And so she was like, okay, this is worth it in order to have access to my children. And
despicable people.
Right. And then like a few years in, she was kind of like, I have zero agency. And she didn't even really know the extent to the salaries she was paying.
Oh my God.
But, she later found out like her dad was taking a higher salary than he was giving to her.
Yeah. They're all just ticks. They're all just fucking ticks sucking off of her. It's awful.
Yeah. And also like they'd be like partying all the time and they wouldn't let her have a drop of alcohol. But then they also sent her to like rehab all the time for over-the-counter energy supplements she managed to get her hands on. Because like, if
you're an addict, you'll find a way.
Well, I have no idea how much of an addict she actually is.
Oh,
maybe
really?
she is. Maybe she's not. In this book, she makes it sound like she's not. She's like, I was just doing normal stuff, but everything I did, they just framed it as like,
I believe that. Yeah.
Right. Because then they basically put her, it was the equivalent
You don't do, if you're an addict, well, I mean, I guess you could keep denying it, but usually if you've been to recovery, you know, have the language.
That's why I'm like, I don't, right. They put her in a rehab facility. But to me, it was basically like how we used to lock women up in mental institutions.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure.
Like they basically locked her up. They wouldn't let her leave. They put her on lithium.
Ugh.
She was just like, I was like, couldn't.
Zoned out.
Yeah, she was just zoned out. And she was like, I couldn't think straight. And they were like, she was like, you know, they're taking my blood pressure 3 times a day. They're taking my blood every day. They were like acting like I was so sick. But she was like, but I'd just been on this like grueling schedule performing. Like, how can you put me on tour and then the next day tell me I'm sick? Like I was highly functioning.
So amped up. Yeah. No, I'm going to read that for sure.
Yeah.
There's actually like a suite of good music autobios and bios.
It's bonkers how
like
many.
Like there's that Sonic Youth one, there's Sly Stones, there's the new Madonna book.
There's a Lou Reed one.
There's a Lou Reed book. I want to read all of those. I don't have time to read them all.
Dolly Parton just put out this big book.
Did she?
Yeah.
What? Oh my God.
It's like, I don't get it because there seems to have been like, this is like the 3rd one, but I think she did this one. It's like a big coffee table book.
There is, well, that's the thing is that every book about her that comes out is always like this little slice, right? Like it's like, oh, Dolly the songwriter or Dolly this, or like there's no authoritative Dolly Parton book that exists. Like there's no autobio, there's no bio, there's nothing that looks at the totality of her career.
Whoa.
Someone, it's like, I don't know why. She should have had 5 of them by now.
Someone's working on that.
Maybe there's one crappy one that came out in the 80s that's like a classic, you know, like crappy 80s biography, but there's nothing. And actually that reminded me, I don't know if you saw my note, some woman came in looking for a Taylor Swift book. And
I've ordered some.
Right? There's like a couple of like crappy biographies that like we should at least
There are a bunch of kids books.
Yeah, but there's a couple that are at least for like teenagers that aren't like pure.
Right. I don't know if I actually ordered those, but I'll look again.
I saw you bought like the golden.
The Golden Book is what the best selling one.
I know, it's like 5th selling book in the country, I think, or something insane. Yeah. All right. My last book, because we are just going way over time, is this book that I stole from you last time I was at the bookshop, Of Boys and Men, by Richard Reeves. And I don't know why it was on the back table, but it was generally fair game. It looked like it was a return, or I don't know what it was. It was
a return because we had it on the shelf for a really long time. And who we returned it to, it was the wrong place, apparently.
Oh.
I don't know. They were like, this isn't an approved return, which whatever. So we'll just eat that. Whatever. It's fine.
It's really good. I don't know why it hasn't gotten a little bit more buzz, but maybe there's other books that are kind of like it.
There are a lot like it, to be honest, about like raising boys, right?
No, it's not about raising boys.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I mean, kind of in some ways is, but what it is an examination of how men of all kinds, especially black men, but you know, any man basically, they're struggling, right? Like if you like all of the gains, like if you look at like wage growth from now to 1970, from 1970 to now, all of those wage gains can be accounted for by women, right? Basically,
we had a lot of ground to make up.
Well, that's for sure. That's for sure. But basically, men are making the same amount that they made in 1970. All the gains are women, right? Women now are like 55% of all college degrees. And like in humanities style degrees, they're sometimes like 70% of all degrees. You know, like men have a falling life expectancy in the United States.
It's bad.
Unheard of in a first world country. And just like he goes through like stat after stat after stat and just shows that basically men and boys are like failing, right? Like, and one of the craziest things is Richard is a Brookings Institute scholar or whatever. So public policy guy, right? And is really good at looking at all these government funded programs and their efficacy, right? Basically, if you get government money, you have to put a report out at the end of your little program that says like whether it worked or not. There's basically no evidence that well, there are very few, but almost as a whole, you can say without being hyperbolic that every social program designed to help people only helps women.
Whoa.
Right? Like almost everything, because they'll put out these studies like, oh, reduced food insecurity by 13%, right? And then you go look at it, men 0, women 26 or whatever, and like every single program. Oh, like, let's try, all these programs. Let's get poor people into college. Doesn't help men at all. Let's get, blah, blah, blah. Every single one lifts women and so he goes through a variety of reasons of why this might be, but basically talks about like, it's people ignoring the biology of men and women, right? Like the modern left equality movement basically says that masculinity is a social construct, right? Like gender is a social construct. The only reason we have these male and female roles is because we've created this, society. And if we just make everything equal, then everything will be equal. And he's like, no, like testosterone exists. Like boys are demonstrably more aggressive as 1-year-old babies. Do you think they've been cultured as 1-year-olds? And so by ignoring like the biology of the fact that men and women are actually different, we don't do, and because, society has acknowledged patriarchy at this point and, basically, all of these equality programs have now existed since the 70s. We're like, oh, we're still working on women. You're basically not allowed as a policy person to be like, oh, well, did we check to see if this helped dudes? Because everybody's like, well, dudes are fine, right?
Right.
And so then he also argues this is why we've completely ceded men to the right wing. And the right wing, they see it, right? And they're like, oh, the war on men. But it's all men's rights. And let's go backward to the 1950s when times were awesome. Let's make America great again. He's like, that's obviously shit. But the left won't allow you to talk about it at all. So basically we just ignore it, right? And it's like, like men are 75% more likely to kill themselves. They're half of all unemployed men reported taking painkillers this week. Like,
oh my God.
Yeah, like it's crazy. Like, there's all these things like men are in pain. They have, no job prospects. They're broke, all this sort of stuff. But what's great about this is because he's a policy guy, he actually proposes a bunch of policy reforms. And so I'm really focused on the ones that are in education, right? But for instance, the prefrontal cortex in boys matures about 1.5 years later on average than girls.
Oh,
right?
yes.
So that's why
we've known that for a long time.
For a long time. Everybody knows 13-year-old girls, super mature. They can have a conversation with you. 13-year-old boys, morons, like climbing up ladders and like jumping off, right?
And it's not fully developed till they're 25.
Right, yeah. But like just in general, like why don't we start boys like 1 year later? He's like, boys should start kindergarten at 6, girls at 5. That would solve like 50% of the education gap between boys and girls. It's like, he's like, we basically just set these boys up to fail. They can't, ADHD, all this shit. He's like, it's basically just undeveloped prefrontal cortex. And we're asking them to do things that their biology is not able to do. They're set up to fail. Things like that. But also like, this, I know that I complain about this in my school district and everybody acts like I'm a jerk. I'm like, we don't employ a single man in either of our elementary schools, not as a janitor, not as a,
what?
teacher, nothing.
You don't have one?
Not one boy. So you go to school K through 2 in our elementary school, you don't even see a man in the building.
That's insane.
Right? And he's like, I don't know, maybe that's bad for boys to not have a single male role model for like 3 years of schooling.
That's really bad.
And it's getting worse. Like, English teachers, there's only 25% of high school English teachers are men now. 17% of English teachers in middle school are men. Right? So the place where boys do worst, literacy, they have no male role models. And we know for sure because the data says that boys do better with boy teachers and girls do better with girl teachers. Like But girls have girl teachers everywhere. Boys, they basically don't exist. Only 2% of all teachers are Black men.
Wow.
You know?
When our younger son was going into 5th grade. So last year of elementary school, we sent a note. We were like, we've never, ever really been in touch with you. Like, we just let you do your thing. We've never had a request about teachers. Like, we'd really love, there's one 5th grade teacher who's a dude.
Yeah.
He's the only dude teacher in the school, I think.
Yeah.
And we were like, we really would like Wells to have him. Because we were just like, we just thought it was super important for him to.
And, well, Wells is just a perfect example. That kid is like a dude's dude. He loves being a dude, you know?
But he also loves like being hugged and like.
It's not like he has no sort of classically feminine characteristics, but like that dude's a dude, you know, he loves sports and like he's super charismatic and he loves people and, you know, he's just. Yeah. You can see how he would benefit from positive male role models that show him how to funnel all that energy and stuff, you know? And,
totally.
And so like, you know, he's like, so there's one point he's like, oh, you know, what we should do when we're hiring at, when we're letting people into colleges with education programs, we should give men a 2-to-1 thumb on the scale to get them into the colleges. Right. And he's like, does that sound like crazy discrimination and affirmative action? That's what we do for women in STEM schools, you know? And so he's like, he calls it HEAL, right? We're always talking about STEM, science, technology, education, or what is E in STEM? Engineering and math or whatever. He says we should be emphasizing HEAL for boys just the way we did STEM for girls, which is like health, education, arts, and literacy.
Yes. That's a great idea.
And he's like, okay, you know, men don't have job prospects because like all the jobs that they traditionally did are shrinking, where all the job growth is in health and education and all that. And it's like, oh, boys, but you're not allowed in there. So you're hosed. You know, he's like, we should be having like publicly funded campaigns to convince dudes to be nurses. Like that's where the jobs are.
Totally. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm on board with that. But you're also reminding me how in 3rd grade, Wells had a teacher during the conference. She was like, you know, his reading scores are like really bad. He was seeing a reading specialist. Yeah. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, but he might just be a math person. And I like was like, oh, so we're giving up on him?
Yeah, right now? 3rd grade. Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably dunsies. Yeah.
He's done.
Yeah.
He's just
that's that's totally the thing, right? And he also just talks.
They're just
they do, yeah.
So we'll just focus on the math. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that.
We're not going to do that. Yeah, and he just talks about how like this whole like toxic masculinity has been warped, right? Like toxic masculinity used to be like a compassionate thing for men, right? Like the fact that you've been told you're not supposed to cry, and you're not supposed to care people, and you're whatever. That's created this hardened shell that won't allow you to be a fully realized person. That was toxic masculinity. But then now it's like, oh, a guy does a bad thing. And it's like, oh, well, toxic masculinity, men are toxic. Right. And it's like, no, that's.
I mean, I think it's so hard. It's complicated because, I think a lot of women are like, well, yeah, we did that for hundreds of years. We just got ignored and our biology got ignored. And so now it's your turn, buddy.
Right.
But obviously that's
not productive.
It's not productive.
No.
Because now all the dudes are out there shooting everybody and like killing themselves too, so like, well, both things not great.
Yeah.
As the mother of 2 boys, like I'd really like to see them thrive in life.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that boys who are the children of college educated people are mostly fine.
Okay.
You look at the stats though. You look at the stats, like the boys born to high school single mothers, they basically have no shot. They're like, just it's bad out there.
That's so sad.
Like the stats on like Black men in jail. Basically, if you're a Black man born in Baltimore, you have like a 50% chance of being in jail. It's like insane how high it is. But I highly recommend. There are other ones he references other books, that are sort of along the same ilk, and he's like, I know this is third rail stuff, like you're not allowed to say like what about the men, but he's like, just screwing
But we
ourselves.
actually maybe need to talk
Yeah.
about them then.
And also, his last book was called Dream Hoarders, which is
Mm-hmm.
all about how like the 1% just hoards it all to themselves. So he's got some.
Let's
good,
talk about that.
He's got some
Cool.
good progressive bona fides.
Great.
You know, he's a Brit who works for Brookings Institute, but it's called Of Boys and Men. It came out 2021, 2022, something like that. It's new, so that's the thing. It's not dated. It's like right now, and like I'm gonna give it to our superintendent of schools. Like it's
Awesome.
like I think this is a conversation people need to have.
Very cool. We were not super quick about that, but it was very
Now
interesting.
we're like an hour. Sorry about that, everybody.
We'll have to wrap up quickly, really quickly
Sorry.
here.
Hope everybody had a great Halloween, and go to our website, click on the events tab, and you'll see all the cool stuff that we're doing.
While you're signing up for our
brands all of a
newsletter.
sudden coming up. Like what is it, like next week now?
I'm feeling a little nervous when I think about it. It's 2
Yeah.
weeks.
I'm not coming down.
No, it's evening. We got
Yeah.
all hands on deck down here.
Okay,
So.
good, because I didn't want to sleep over. But I am going. We will be at the Crime Bake. If you don't know what the Crime Bake is,
Ooh,
Google
Crime
it. And you
Bake.
should come. We'll be there, slanging books.
So many books.
My disc is almost full again, so we should probably
We gotta go.
cut this off. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.